Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Thank you for joining us here today on CPAC as we bring you special coverage on the final report from the public inquiry into foreign interference. As we take a look right now at the hearing room, this is at the National Archives building, where we will hear from the Chief Commissioner for this inquiry, Justice Marie-Josée Augue, expected to talk about her findings in about 5 minutes' time, expected to address what Canada can do to protect the electoral process from foreign interference, what can be done to counter disinformation campaigns, in particular from foreign countries, and also talk about a finding from the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, or NSICOP, that watchdog group of Parliament, concluding back in June that some parliamentarians were semi-witting or witting participants in foreign interference. Now, some people have been able to take an early look at the final report this morning, taking part in a lockup to review the documents. Again, this is ahead of Justice Augue speaking to the media and to Canadians about her findings in the inquiry. CPAC's Andrew Thompson was one of the people who had an early look at the documents. He joins us right now. So, Andrew, good to see you. I know it's been a busy morning already for you, but, I mentioned the allegation from that NSICOP report back in June, talking about witting participants among parliamentarians, the Parliamentary Watchdog Group, essentially asking Justice Augue to look into that allegation. What did she have to say there? Not an original part of her terms of reference, but added on, but obviously of great concern. What do we hear from Justice Augue regarding that matter?
Right, Michael, right near the very start of this executive summary, which alone is 120 pages, that shows you the breadth of this report. But she does talk about this NSICOP report, and she does say that although the phenomenon, it does remain marginal and largely ineffective, that there's no cause for widespread alarms. She says she has not seen any evidence of traitors in Parliament plotting with foreign states to act against Canada. She goes on to say that although there are a few cases involving things like attempts to curry favor, again, she says that it remains marginal. She's not aware of any federal legislation or policies that have been enacted or repealed on account of foreign interference. She says that while some of these states' attempts are troubling, that there is some concerning conduct by parliamentarians, there is no cause for widespread alarm, and she says that it should not be overblown. She goes into some more detail later on about the NSICOP report, and she tells us that that report has no names of individual politicians and that her mandate as part of this commission does not involve passing judgment on the culpability of an elected official, even if there were individual names involved. And she goes on to say again that there are legitimate concerns about some of the conduct being reported in that NSICOP report. But of note, she says this: the report's wording has caused consternation, but it is unwarranted in some respects. The situation, Michael, is not as clear-cut or extreme as the fears have warranted.
Mm-hmm. So not as clear-cut as warranted concerns, but again, marginal. Obviously, a huge concern for Canadians, because when that NSICOP report, of that one line really took over the discussion, although we heard competing testimony regarding that conclusion from the Prime Minister, among them, who was pushing back on this idea of traitors within Parliament. So Justice Augue saying that there are concerns, but marginal, very important for Canadians. Let's move on to the original terms of mandate, though, because really this was also convened to look into how the federal government responded to foreign interference. What does Justice Augue have to say about that, Andrew?
Well, she says foreign interference and the threat of foreign interference has taken its toll on Canada. She does then say that Canada has been resilient and that our democratic institutions have held up well, but she does have criticism for how the federal government has responded. She says the government has sometimes taken too long to act, and that coordination between the various players in the government has not always been optimal. She says the way in which information is passed throughout the federal government has often not been effective in terms of the information that needs to get to policy makers, in terms of getting to elected officials, that it hasn't flowed properly, that information has not always been adequately tracked or properly appreciated by the people who received it, and that inside the federal government there is some confusion about roles and accountability when it comes to the fight against foreign interference. Now, she does say that the government has made some strides over the past 2 years implementing new measures and that the government is now prioritizing the fight against foreign interference. She says it must continue, but again, and these are the words that Justice Hall gives herself. So far, its efforts in regards of informing the public about foreign interference have been piecemeal and underwhelming.
Okay, piecemeal, underwhelming. Andrew, thank you. That's just an introduction to what we're going to hear from Justice Og. As you can see, she's now taken to the dais in the hearing room itself. Let's now take a listen to the Chief Commissioner for the Public Inquiry into Foreign Interference.
After 18 months of intense work,
That might be a euphemism.
and intense is even an
I can
understatement,
inform you.
I'm pleased to inform you that the Commission on Foreign Interference, over which I preside, submitted its final report to the Governor and Council today. The final report is available on the Commission's website, and I invite you to read it. You will notice that the report is composed of several volumes. I encourage those with a strong interest in our work to read the report in its entirety, as the individual chapters provide a wealth of detail and context that are important to understanding the issues, the conclusions, and the recommendations. However, those who prefer to do so can read the summary in Volume 1.
Également votre indulgence.
Please be forgiving of any small typos or small errors, because surely you will understand that producing such a hefty report in such a short time was a massive undertaking, so we may have missed a few typos. Volume 5 includes the chapter outlining recommendations and the reasons behind them. Some recommendations are more technical, aimed at improving the way information on foreign interference circulates within the government. Other recommendations are more substantive in nature and are aimed at better protecting our democratic institutions more broadly. The work required to carry out the Commission's mandate was titanic, and it is the fruit of a remarkable collective effort. Many people made this possible, and I thank them from the bottom of my heart. There are many thank yous in the report itself. I extend my thanks to all the participants and their lawyers, whose contributions have been invaluable. I would especially like to highlight the exceptional work of the Commission team members. Their professionalism, rigor, and dedication have been exemplary. You have been incredible, and I thank you.
I was created and I was appointed commissioner in September 2023. I was given a very precise mandate. First, I had to examine and evaluate foreign interference by state and non-state actors and its potential repercussions on the integrity of the last two federal general elections, the way in which related information about foreign interference circulated, and the measures taken in response to this information. Second, I was asked to examine and assess the government's ability to detect, deter, and counter foreign interference in democratic processes and institutions, and to make recommendations for strengthening Canada's protection against such interference. It is important to recall the nature of my mandate, as foreign interference goes far beyond what I was tasked to examine. Foreign interference can affect more than elections and democratic institutions. Just think of universities, scientific research, and private industry. Examining foreign interference in its entirety would have been a giant and almost impossible task, but that was not my mandate. Instead, In keeping with its mandate, the Commission conducted a thorough and rigorous examination of how foreign interference manifests itself in Canada's electoral processes and democratic institutions. At the outset of our work, I pledged that the Commission will carry out its mandate independently, impartially, fairly, and transparently. I will also add with rigor, proportionality, and speed. I believe it has done just that. La Commission devait être disciplinée si elle...
The Commission had to be disciplined in order to meet its deadlines. We could not call every possible witness or introduce every bit of possible evidence. Rather, we focused on the key issues. I am certain that at the end of the day, our work has led to a better understanding of foreign interference and of how the government is trying to counter foreign interference. The investigation has also enabled us to identify what the government has done well as what it has done less well. We have also been able to identify ways that we can do better in the future.
La Commission avait...
The Commission's mandate was also to make recommendations to strengthen the protection of our democratic processes and institutions against foreign interference. Our report contains 50 such recommendations.
pour vous...
I would like to take a moment to remind you of the various steps in the Commission's work. In January 2024, we started by holding 5 days of public hearings on issues related to the Commission's need to both demonstrate transparency and protect national security. This preliminary work was important because the Commission needed access to highly classified Canadian intelligence holdings in relation to foreign interference. These hearings were very useful as they enabled us to explore ways of making public information that was not intended to be public in order to inform Canadians. We then met dozens of potential witnesses and identified those who had relevant information, and we identified those who could shed light on the first part of the Commission's mandate. Given that most of the documents and information received by the Commission could not be discussed in public for reasons of national security, I first held 6 days of in-camera hearings. Those hearings were followed by 10 days of public hearings. During these hearings, I heard a total of 98 testimonies. Following these hearings, on May 3rd, 2024, I produced a report setting out my preliminary conclusions.
The Commission then pursued its investigation by seeking to better identify and understand the means available to Canada to defend itself against foreign interference. We obtained access to tens of thousands of documents and conducted over 100 interviews. This led to further hearings during which I heard 143 testimonies over 12 days of in-camera hearings and 20 days of public hearings. I also had the benefit of meeting and hearing from over 100 citizens from various diaspora communities who have been victims of foreign interference, particularly transnational repression. They shared their experiences with me, allowing me to better understand the human impact of this scourge. Finally, nearly 40 experts helped me consider the best ways to conduct this battle. Now, what must we retain from the Commission's work? Firstly, that certain foreign states are attempting to interfere in our electoral processes and democratic institutions. This is not a new phenomenon. nor should it surprise us. States have been trying to interfere with each other since the dawn of time. What is new, however, are the means being deployed by these states, the extent to which the phenomenon seems to be taking hold, and the fact that it is being talked about publicly. That said, and it is one of my most important observations, our democratic institutions have remained robust in the face of attempted foreign interference. Although there are a very small number of situations where foreign interference may have had some impact on the outcome of a nomination contest or the result of an election in a given riding, foreign interference did not impact the outcome of the last two general elections. Although a few situations involving attempts to curry favor or develop problematic relationship with a parliamentarian have come to light, such phenomena remain marginal and so far appear to have been largely ineffective. Some may have benefited from the support of a foreign state, sometimes without knowing anything about it. But again, so far, this does not seem to have led to any real gains for the states involved. Nor have I seen any evidence to suggest that there are currently so-called traitors in Parliament. While I saw evidence of some concerning behavior, the evidence does not show any MPs plotting with foreign states against Canada's interests. Alors maintenant, que faut-il retenir des travaux de la Commission?
What are the takeaways? What must be retained from the Commission's work? Firstly, that certain foreign states are attempting to interfere in our electoral processes and democratic institutions. This is not a new phenomenon, nor should it surprise us. States have been trying to interfere with each other since the dawn of time. What is new, however, are the means being deployed by these states, the extent to which the phenomenon seems to be taking hold, and the fact that it is being talked about publicly. That said, and this is one of my most important observations, our democratic institutions have remained robust in the face of attempted foreign interference. Although there are a very small number of situations where foreign interference may have had some impact on the outcome of a nomination contest or on the result of an election in a given riding, foreign interference did not impact the outcome of the last two general elections. Although a few situations involving attempts to curry favor or develop problematic relationships with the parliamentarian have come to light, such phenomena remain marginal and so far appear to have been ineffective. Some may have benefited from the support of a foreign state, sometimes without knowing about it. But again, thus far, this does not seem to have led to any real gains for the states involved. Nor have I seen any evidence to suggest that there are currently so-called traitors in Parliament. While I saw evidence of some concerning behavior, the evidence does not show any MPs plotting with foreign states against Canada's interests.
Il faut néanmoins
Nevertheless, we must remain vigilant, because the threat of foreign interference is real, and even if the impact has been limited so far, it is damaging to our democracy, and it greatly affects those who are victims. Canada has responded to the increase in attempted foreign interference by putting in place numerous measures and mechanisms to better detect, prevent, and counter it. I describe these measures and mechanisms in detail in the report. However, the government sometimes took too long to act, and coordination was not always optimal. The means used to communicate information to certain decision makers, including elected officials, proved imperfect. Sometimes very imperfect, since certain documents never got to where they were supposed to go. And there seems to be no good reason why. Above all, what I found is that the government has been, overall, a poor communicator when it comes to foreign interference.
Has responded to the increase in attempted foreign interference by putting in place numerous measures and mechanisms to better detect, prevent, and counter it. I describe these in detail in the report. However, the government sometimes took too long to act, and coordination was not always optimal. The means used to communicate information to certain decision makers, including elected officials, proved imperfect. Sometimes, very much so, since certain documents never got to where they were supposed to go, and there seems to be no good reason why. But above all, I found that the government has been overall a poor communicator when it comes to foreign interference. La plupart des Canadiennes et des Canadiens ont...
Most Canadians first learned about foreign interference through media reports, without the government being the source of the information communicated. This should not have been the case. The government needs to better inform the public, and it needs to be more transparent. Of course, sometimes the government is justified in keeping its operations and knowledge secret. And in matters of national security, sometimes it is essential for the government to keep things secret. But the government must find ways of keeping the public informed to prevent a loss of confidence, public confidence, in our institutions. The measures put in place over the past 2 years and the evidence I heard on the subject suggests that the government is now making the fight against foreign interference a high priority.
Government has the primary responsibility for ensuring national security and protecting our democratic institutions. But what I have read and heard convinces me that society as a whole must contribute to defending these institutions if we want to ensure their survival. Foreign actors are no longer content to use traditional means to interfere. They are also using sophisticated technological means and increasingly sowing disinformation in traditional media, but above all, on social media. Distinguishing what is true from what is false is becoming increasingly difficult, and the consequences are, in my view, extraordinarily harmful. The impact of traditional methods should not be underestimated, but the greatest threat, the one that I believe threatens the very existence of our democracy, is disinformation. This threat is all the more nefarious because the means available to counter it are limited and very difficult to implement. Nevertheless, we must not give up, but rather attack it forcefully altogether. This cannot be the sole purview of government. It will not work. Les acteurs étrangers ne se contentent plus d'utiliser.
Foreign actors are no longer content to use traditional means to interfere. They are also using sophisticated technological means and increasingly sowing disinformation in traditional media, but above all, and most of all, on social media. Distinguishing what is true from what is false is becoming increasingly difficult. And the consequences are, in my view, extraordinarily harmful. The impact of traditional methods should not be underestimated, but the greatest threat, the one that I believe threatens the very existence of our democracy, is disinformation. This threat is all the more nefarious because the means available to counter it are limited and are also very difficult to implement. Nevertheless, we must not give up, but rather attack it forcefully altogether. This cannot be the sole purview of government. But we must also be realistic. Foreign interference will never be completely eradicated, and it will always be necessary to counter it. This is even more true as the world changes and becomes increasingly unstable or destabilized. Democracies across the world are under attack from all sides, and the technological resources available to malicious actors are multiplying.
Foreign interference will never be completely eradicated, and it will always be necessary to counter it. This is even more true as the world changes and the world order seems to destabilize. Democracies around the world are under attack from all sides, and the technological resources available to malicious actors are multiplying. It will therefore be a never-ending battle. One of our society's greatest achievements is to have created a political and social order that give us the freedom to choose those who will represent us in government, the right to contribute to discussions about our future, and the chance to live in peace with one another. But protecting these achievements requires that all of society, including each and every one of us, contribute particularly to the war against mis- and disinformation. L'une des plus grandes réussites de notre société.
One of our society's greatest achievements is to have created a political and social order that gives us the freedom to choose those who will represent us in government, the right to contribute to discussions about our future, and the chance to live in peace with one another. But protecting these achievements requires that all of society, including every one of us, contribute, particularly to the war against misinformation and disinformation. I hope that this report will help to clarify the way forward. I hope that the report will encourage each and every one of us to help protect our democracy. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I won't take any question because, as you know, the report won't speak for itself. Thank you.
So there you have it. Justice Marie-Josée Augue addressing the final report of the public inquiry into foreign interference. And as you heard, some questions were tried to be asked of the justice. She says that she's going to let the report speak for itself. A fairly large report as we bring back Andrew Thompson to the program again, you know, and you were saying it earlier on, Andrew, we're talking about a report of some 120 pages here, very detailed on conclusions, very detailed in terms of recommendations. But let's pick up on some of the earlier points that you were addressing. First and foremost, this idea that there are no traitors within Parliament, which I think was the concern following that NSICOP report back in June, as they talked about witting participants in foreign interference. Talk to us about her conclusions on that, because there really was a disconnect between what we heard from the Prime Minister and his National Security and Intelligence Advisor, and ultimately what we heard from NSICOP itself.
Right, Michael. If you go back to the Prime Minister's testimony last fall, he talked about the fact that there were evidence of conservative politicians involved in foreign interference or vulnerable to foreign interference. He did later clarify when asked that, of course, Liberals were also subject to foreign interference as well. But again, we heard that clear language, and she repeated it in those remarks just now, Justice Augue saying that she hadn't seen any evidence of any traitors in Parliament. She did go on to talk a bit again in the report that she's just released about her take on that NSICOP report, saying that, you know, intelligence cannot be treated as fact on its own, that there has to be more corroboration, that you cannot simply judge someone guilty of foreign interference without giving them a chance to publicly defend themselves. And that's part of the issue we do face here, Michael, and this has been a theme throughout this commission, is that tug of war between more transparency about foreign interference, but also the need for protecting national security and also protecting the names of people who may be innocent.
Protection of people who may be innocent, again, because intelligence is not necessarily proven fact, as we've heard time and again during this public inquiry. Let's also go over some of the immediate recommendations being made by Justice Ogue here, because she does raise concerns about, for example, the sharing of intelligence, or perhaps the failure to share intelligence, and how it was handled. So what does she want to see happen in the immediate term, Andrew?
It's interesting. There are 51 recommendations, and of those 51, she says 24, in her words, should be done promptly, even before the next election. And of course, the big question here in Ottawa is when that next election is going to be. It could be coming up very soon. So the timeline is going to be critical here. But in terms of how information flows inside the government and inside political parties and what Canadians are told, here's some of the key recommendations she's making. She says all political party leaders in the House of Commons should try to get their top secret security clearance as soon as possible after they become leader. We know this has been an issue with other parties targeting the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, for not doing that. Justice Ogue also agreeing with many recommendations that we heard from the Chief Electoral Officer in terms of what political parties should be doing in terms of information and money and security. She says that nomination contests and leadership contests should be restricted to Canadian citizens and permanent residents. That's what we are seeing right now in the current Liberal leadership race. She wants to see more effective record keeping from political parties. She wants to see the Elections Act toughened up when it comes to bribery, intimidation, and fraud. She also wants to see tougher rules for third-party organizations that get involved in politics when it comes to their financing and their transparency. And it's also interesting, you heard a big part of her statement just now was on this threat of disinformation and the effect that can have on our democracy. She wants to see more transparency for how artificial intelligence gets used in political communication, and she wants to see the government look at a ban on false information being spread to undermine an election or its results. So those are just a few of the, I guess you could say, priority recommendations she has. There are more. She wants parliamentarians to get told faster when there are threats against them. And in a more wider sense, Michael, what she's calling for is a whole of government foreign interference strategy across the entire federal government. And again, going back to this issue of communication she mentioned, she wants a government-wide communication strategy when it comes to foreign interference. You heard her point that out as one of her most serious conclusions, that lack of information getting to the Canadian public.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you know, before we're done, Andrew, we should also address the issue of diaspora groups. Addressed a little bit in today's speech from Justice Ogue, but of course going deeper in the report itself. And we know that diaspora groups in this country have often been the targets of foreign interference. What does she have to say on that matter? What recommendations is she making in terms of protecting diaspora Canadians from that type of intimidation?
Right. Now, she does have a section on transnational repression. So this is activity by foreign governments, foreign actors in Canada against people living here. And she says it's hard to overstate the seriousness of this issue when it comes to foreign interference. However, she does have a caveat because she says her terms of reference did not allow for an in-depth study of this issue. So she's saying, look, we're only scratching the surface on this issue. The report does talk about what the Commission heard in terms of efforts from Iran and China, particularly on this issue. But she does have a few recommendations, and a lot of them, again, go back to this issue of disinformation. For one thing, consider more language training for new Canadians to access professional media. She says Perhaps you want to use artificial intelligence tools to help boost people's access to more mainstream English and French language media. She also says that in terms of the RCMP, and again, this is a key agency involved in foreign interference, that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who are working in these affected communities where there is this diaspora population, they should be trained more in transnational repression to be more aware of this. And finally, Michael, another recommendation of note on this from Justice Og. She says the Canadian government needs to engage more with foreign consulates to make sure that they understand what the line is between normal diplomatic activity and foreign interference.
Andrew, really appreciate that. Thank you for the information. CPAC's Andrew Thompson from the National Archives building, where the Commission has been hearing from witnesses and where today Justice Marie-Josée Og delivered her final report. Now, just to go over some of the key points once again, Justice Og saying that the evidence shows that in the years under review by the Commission, the flow of intelligence from CSIS to the rest of government was sometimes problematic. Some reports, she says, did not reach intended recipients. Some reports also requesting a response from the recipients went unanswered. And at times, it was impossible to determine who received or read CSIS reports. So some of the key findings here on foreign interference and how the government handled such intelligence. And joining us now to talk about this is Michael Kempa, a security expert. Michael Olson, Associate Professor of Criminology at the University of Ottawa. Michael, thank you for joining us again. So listen, I'll ask you to start with what we heard from Justice Og and what she had to say about the flow of information to government and how it was then handled. What did you make of her conclusions and really what she is asking the government does to fix the problems that she has identified here?
One of the main theme that she came up with is the idea that people think that once they pass along the information, their role is finished. What she stressed is now we have to have mechanisms in place for once you pass it along to make sure that something important has actually been picked up. So follow up. Ask if the minister's staff, for example, has passed that information along to the minister. What is the timeline for response? Basically to make sure that it doesn't end with simply passing things along.
All along. So what does this tell you about the Trudeau government's handling of the security file? Because, you know, as these disconnects are pointed out, of course, the Trudeau government has been accused of willingly turning a blind eye. What do you make of the conclusions and the earlier allegations lobbed against the government?
Well, I think what's clear in the report is it's not a question of people having been motivated to serve other states or to engage in illegal activity, rather a complete underestimation of the extent of the problem, lack of preparedness, misreading information. So, and then the government perhaps not wanting to get into something that might have been uncomfortable for them, but also thinking it wasn't that serious. It's been made very clear over the course of the last 2 years that the government has underestimated this set of issues, that there wasn't enough action, and only lately, really, under the weight of this inquiry, have we begun to do some of the right things, and that's what Og has stressed today.
As you say, stress today. And to that, let's build upon it, because we did have that NSICOP report back in June that talked about witting, unwitting participants in foreign interference among parliamentarians. She says she's seen no conclusion about traitors within Parliament. Does that put the issue to bed, do you think?
Well, no, it doesn't. It clears us the idea that there were people who were actually traitors, people who were conspiring against the interests of Canada. But Og is clear to say it doesn't mean that nothing wrong or nothing that bad didn't happen. It does suggest that there were people who engaged in perhaps naive or sometimes unethical engagement with foreign states, just not criminal treason. So, and I think that has to do again with people underestimating or being naive about the role of states wanting to infiltrate our parliament and influence our political process. So in a sense, the work is still in front of us. It's just not about a witch hunt to blame certain people or lay criminal charges.
Okay, the work's still in front of us, as you say. So, Michael, we are now in the midst of a Liberal leadership campaign. We are expecting to be in the midst of a federal election sooner rather than later. So as a security expert, having looked at this report and reviewing it this morning during the lockup that allowed you to get the information earlier, what do you hope the Trudeau government does to respond to this report ahead of any election?
Well, on their leadership campaign, it's very important that proper databases of everybody who's registered to vote are maintained and cross-checked so that we don't have things like people registering multiple times or registering their pets and so forth to vote. The second big thing is once we get to the election, nominations be cleared up. Justice Ogue is very clear that it should be restricted to only citizens and permanent residents, no students who are in Canada on foreign visas. And again, this type of follow-up with the databases to make sure that the right people who reside in ridings and are qualified to vote are the ones actually casting votes for candidates.
Okay. Michael, always appreciate the time. That is Michael Kempa. Well, as we heard Justice Marie-Josée Ogue deliver her final remarks this morning, let's review a bit of what she had to say, not only about, as I was speaking with Michael earlier on, the NSCOP allegations of unwitting participants in foreign interference, but also about the issue of sharing information itself. Take a listen once more to Justice Ogue.
Although a few situations involving attempts to curry favor or develop problematic relationship with the parliamentarian have come to light, such phenomena remain marginal and so far appear to have been largely ineffective. Some may have benefited from the support of a foreign state, sometimes without knowing anything about it. But again, so far, this does not seem to have led to any real gains for the states involved. Nor have I seen any evidence to suggest that there are currently so-called traitors in Parliament. While I saw evidence of some concerning behavior, the evidence does not show any MPs plotting with foreign states against Canada's interest. Has responded to the increase in attempted foreign interference by putting in place numerous measures and mechanisms to better detect, prevent, and counter it. I describe these in detail in the report. However, the government sometimes took too long to act, and coordination was not always optimal. The means used to communicate information to certain decision makers, including elected officials, proved imperfect. Sometimes, very much so, since certain documents never got to where they were supposed to go, and there seems to be no good reason why. But above all, I found that the government has been overall a poor communicator when it comes to foreign interference.
Again, Justice Marie-Josée Ogue from earlier as she talks about foreign interference in this country. Well, with that, let's bring in our bureau chiefs right now. Robert Fife is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail. Joël Denis Bellevance, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. They are at the National Archives building. And here in studio, Tonda McCharles, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. Hello to the three of you.
Hi there.
So here we are. Hello. Listen, so we've been covering this story for well over a year now. We now have this final report from Justice Ogue. I'll begin with initial impressions and get you to start us out, Tonda. What did you make of what we heard from the Chief Commissioner here?
I think that the Commissioner's done us all a great public service by putting in perspective all the intelligence we've heard about and the parliamentary report that was so explosive last spring that seemed to contradict sort of the lines the government had initially taken. And I think she's put it all in perspective, and I hope that it takes some of the temperature down while she has not exonerated neither the government nor the watchdog agencies nor CSIS from doing a better job on communicating both within government and to each other and to MPs who might be affected by foreign interference, but also to Canadians. So kudos to her on a job that hopefully puts things in perspective, and now I think presents a huge challenge for everybody, including opposition parties, to put the thing in perspective and deal with what does need doing, especially now that we're into leadership and possibly an election soon, and not get hung up on their interpretation or their version of events.
Okay, we'll pick up on some of those points in a bit. But Bob, JD, and I'll get you to start us out here. Bob, what do you make your initial impressions, again, on such an important report from the Chief Commissioner who's been looking at a topic that has really overtaken the national agenda for well over a year now?
Well, look, I think this commission has been absolutely important for Canadian democracy. It's allowed Canadians to have a much deeper understanding of how foreign governments meddle in Canadian domestic affairs, particularly in elections. She has laid out the problems in the system and what steps have already been taken to improve the flow of information so that governments are acting much more quickly and much more seriously on foreign interference. She's made a number of 51 recommendations, of which close to half can be implemented potentially before the next election campaign. That's going to be the onus on the government as well. And remember, her first report, the government acted very quickly in bringing a foreign agent registry, making foreign interference a criminal offense, and also making significant changes to the CSIS Act so that CSIS can be much more forthcoming to the Canadian public. So all in all, I think this has been a great effort for the Canadian public. And we were stuck with the former government wanted to have a report by former Governor General David Johnston, and it really was a whitewash. Dismissed. Nobody can dismiss the seriousness of the report that she's handed in to the government today.
JD, your initial impressions?
I totally agree with my two colleagues. This was a very healthy exercise for the state, for the sake of our democracy. I think our democracy is stronger today as a result of this exercise. And Commissioner Hogue, I think, pointed out some of the failings and that in the system, but also inside the government in terms of communicating the appropriate security intelligence to the appropriate people. And that was, I think, one of the big misgivings. And also, I think she's offering a report that will reassure Canadians about the state of our democracy. She concluded that there was no traitor in parliament, as we had some had said that there was some traitor MPs in parliament. She said this is not the case. It's marginal. So I think it brings some reassurance to the Canadian public as we are heading towards the federal election. It's coming in soon enough. And also the fact that Bob mentioned that the government enacted a Foreign Registry Act that was passed last year. There's also some effect that is also felt in the current leadership race. For example, the Liberal Party decided to bring down the rules, or make it tighter rules to make sure that people who are from outside Canada cannot vote in the leadership race, as it was the case in the past. So that's a very good report on all aspects, I would say.
Yeah, and interesting to point out, soon as the leadership race was determined it was going to happen, immediately there were questions about who could get to vote, who would actually be a member, which without a doubt is a fallout of the whole controversy on foreign interference. But when you look at the criticisms here, Tonda, you have essentially Justice Hogue taking issue with the actions of the PMO, taking issue with the conclusions of NSICOP. What do you make of that criticism and what it tells us about the ability of Parliament as is to take on the issue of foreign interference?
Well, I think she's raised a really interesting question around, and let's just deal with the NSICOP report. The Trudeau government established an all-parliamentary committee to be the ones to have access to classified information in order to be sort of that ability to both oversee what the security agencies are doing and convey publicly necessary national security information, warnings, red flags, are the agencies functioning the way they should? And she's pretty clearly said and laid out a picture, which I find troubling. It sounds like the MPs don't know how to actually process what they're hearing, that they rely or overemphasize aspects of intelligence. They haven't processed her main thrust of saying that intelligence is not necessarily facts. It has to be understood and interpreted. And so I think that this raises big questions about how Parliament oversees national security agencies, their work. Separately, and apart from that, how the agencies communicate with the government. She's also communicated that as a problem. And again, in elections then, if there are red flags to be raised about what foreign countries are doing in our elections or leadership races or nominations, how does that get conveyed to the parties and the public? That's, I think, a separate question, and I think she's established a bunch of recommendations that could go a long way to helping us with that. But I found that all these years, I thought, you know, if MPs had eyes on it, it would be a way for us to understand it better. But clearly that report was unnecessarily inflammatory.
Bob, what do you make of it? Again, Justice Og taking issue with the actions of the PMO and also the actions of this parliamentary watchdog.
Well, you know, I thought what she had to say about the fact that CSIS or intelligence agencies have a much better job, need to do a much better job of transparency and openness. She was complimentary about investigative journalism that has been able to expose a lot of what had been going on, but she said that's not the solution. The solution is for our security agencies to be more proactive, to be more transparent, not only with members of Parliament, but with the Canadian public, so that we don't have to, so they're not relying on a leak from a national security agent when the duty of these agencies is to stop the secrecy. Obviously, there's some stuff that they can't, but to lift everybody's boat, so to speak, so that we're all better informed as Canadians. And to me, that's probably the most important recommendation out of this. I mean, she's got a lot of really good recommendations, but the overall recommendation seems to me is that, okay, this is serious. It's not going to go away. The only way we're going to deal with it, if we all, whether you're members of Parliament or a government bureaucrat, a journalist or a voting public, you have to know what's going on, and it's the duty of the government and the security agencies to inform us.
Yeah, in other words, a whole of government response with perhaps a whole of country awareness of the issue itself. Jean-Denis, what were you going to say to that?
Well, to Bob's point, the judge says this is crucial to reestablish the confidence of Canadians towards the institutions, how you communicate secret information that touches national security. How do you communicate it to the public so that they're reassured about the safety of our elections, the integrity of our elections? That's critical to her. And she also had a few good points on the diaspora communities in Canada. And I think that is crucial because those are the first victims of foreign interference. And it is very critical that the government takes that into account and find ways to better protect those communities as they are facing often foreign interference activities from either China, Russia, or Iran, or even India. So that's a critical element.
Critical element, as you say. So in many ways, with these recommendations, we're looking at the Trudeau government to implement, at the very least, the dozen or so recommendations she's making in order to address the fact that we are facing an early election very soon, Tonda. But, you know, I'm also wondering what pressure this creates for the opposition leader, because without naming names, Justice O clearly says that every political leader needs to get the security clearance, which Pierre Poilievre still refuses to do, in order to be informed of these issues.
She put, I think, enormous pressure today on Pierre Poilievre, without naming him, to not only get the security clearance, but to commit to some of these reforms as well. And to trust that, I think that Canadians can stand to hear what it is the agencies might say about any particular party, including his own. So I think she's put pressure on him, not just in terms of getting the security clearance, but also committing to some of the reforms she's recommended, right? So we may be into an election campaign long before any of this stuff gets done. But it requires, I think, now both the leadership candidates for the Liberal Party and the Conservatives before a campaign, and I guess the NDP as well, to lay out how would they tackle this stuff. I mean, the stuff about, you know, instituting ways to detect and report on AI and deep fakes, and, you know, the transparency that she wants around third-party financing and political and involvement in political campaigns. That's important stuff, but they can all commit to it today. Nobody needs to wait until there's a next government.
Bob, what do you say to that?
No, I totally agree. We'll wait until this afternoon. I imagine the government's going to come out, as they did after the first report, and say that they're going to try to bring in some of these recommendations. I hope so. And I hope that Mr. Poilievre will show some real leadership and say that he will have get a national security clearance so that he can hear about some of the apparently troubling intelligence that was raised about some Conservative Party members, and we'll see what happens with that. One of the other things, I just have to mention this, Michael, because Han Dong, now an independent MP, but a Liberal MP, had sued Global Television because they'd said that he had told the Chinese Consul General that the two Michaels should be kept in prison. In the report today, Justice Hogue said that is absolutely false, that he never said that in the intelligence that she'd seen, and that basically she exonerated him. So, the inquiry is good in this sense, too, because somebody who had his name blackened can now hold his head up high, and perhaps the Liberal Party will let him run again. And I imagine Global is going to have to cut a big check to him.
And JD, beyond that, what do you make of, in terms of the pressure this creates on all political parties, including Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives?
Well, Justice Marie-Josée Hogue did her work. She saw evidence through the legal lenses that was necessary to, take the good work of the CSIS, and that should not be taken, with a grain of salt. She put that in a report now. I think that she's throwing the ball in the political court. It's going to be up to the political parties to react appropriately, given the work she has done, the colossal work that she has done. And so it's going to be up to the government and the opposition parties to come up with concrete actions to follow up on that report. That is a major boost for our democracy, I would argue.
Okay, concrete actions, the words you are using. And as you say that, I want to read right now. This is a statement that we're getting from Ruby Sahota, the Minister for Democratic Institutions, as well as David McGuinty, the Minister for Public Safety, in a statement that essentially thanks Justice Hogue for the work she has done and for this final report on the public inquiry into foreign interference. They also say, quote, "Today the government is taking further action to protect our election integrity with the following investments: $44 million starting in 2025-26 and $9.8 million ongoing for the Office of the Chief Electoral Officer to ensure a sufficient investigation capacity to protect against persistent threats to the electoral process, such as foreign interference and disinformation. $27.5 million starting in 2025-26 with a temporary increase of $2 million in 2025-26 for the Canadian Heritage's Digital Citizen Initiative to fund projects that build citizen resilience against online disinformation, and $5.95 million starting in 24-25 for Global Affair Canada's Rapid Response Mechanism to bolster its capacity to monitor and strengthen defenses of the Canadian open source information ecosystem and keep Canadians informed of possible foreign interference during the election." So immediately we're seeing a response here from government. Of course, they've had time to plan this, knowing that something was going to come out today. But multiple millions of dollars here, Tonda.
$73.5 million mostly for some of the systems that are already in action. The Rapid Response Mechanism reports within Global Affairs on foreign interference activities that they detect online, and then there's also some technical support through the Digital Center, or the Digital Citizen Initiative. But what's interesting, the bulk of it, $44 million going to the Office of the Chief Electoral Officer to boost their investigative capacity. That means to detect it, to go out and perhaps see and investigate if there are scurrilous activities going on the ground in ridings, perhaps. And I'm interested in that because it's not just that. I mean, I think with some of the changes that the government made in terms of the foreign interference law, perhaps that'll be a more robust response. I think there are probably still, though, recommendations from Madame Hogue that the government will have to act on. And today we only have a commitment for them to review them, and this will guide our further action. So I think that, questions still have to be asked, just how far they're prepared to go to lift the veil on this thing.
Lift the veil, as you say, but immediate action here. And this is important, Bob, because we are not only now in the midst of a leadership review, or leadership race, rather, for the Liberal Party, also within weeks, months of another federal campaign. How important is this reaction from the Trudeau government at this point?
Oh, it's very important, and we need to see some more action. All the other recommendations dealing with disinformation and AI and all of that stuff that's being used that we expect will become pretty predominant during general election campaign. We now know, thanks to this public inquiry, the extent of how states use disinformation campaigns to elect or defeat people that they don't like, or elect somebody they think might be friendlier to them. And, this is something we never got from the report from former Governor General David Johnston. And that's why I really do believe that judicial and public inquiries are always the best way to go when you have serious issues confronting the country and looking for solutions. I mean, we saw 150 witnesses, 35 days of testimony. The highest bureaucrats in the country, our spy agencies, the Prime Minister, all of these people testifying about how they've dealt with and the shortcomings of dealing with foreign interference. That would not have happened if we did not have a public inquiry headed by a judge. And, I say to her, hats off to her for doing a really excellent job here.
Yeah, well, let's pick up on that. Sorry, JD, go ahead.
I would add to what Bob is saying. I think this was like, as I said, a very healthy exercise, and I would argue that maybe it should be done on a regular basis, maybe every 7 years, to look at whether our institutions are resilient enough and our laws are adapted to a continuing, evolving threat, which is foreign interference, as Justice Marie-Josée Hogg put it in her report. So it should be like we review election acts every time there's an election on a regular basis. I think maybe this should be done, an exercise that should be done on a regular basis. Maybe not every 5 years, but at least on a regular basis.
A regular basis, as you say. I've got about 5 minutes here, and Bob was talking about the open transparency of this process. But before we're done, just a quick go around, because this government has been criticized for not taking security issues seriously enough, beyond foreign interference, a number of other issues. I'm wondering if you think, now that we have this public inquiry in foreign interference issuing this final report, Tonda, are we now in the midst of a culture change in this country that will make permanent security as a top priority that we need to keep an eye on?
Gee, never say. I can't gaze into a crystal ball. I think what's about to become the most pressing issue of our day is the economy, the Trump tariff threats, and all of that. National security is always an ongoing major concern for governments. The difference is that the public really doesn't understand, see how the agencies function, know the threats that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, right? So, but what I think it does do, though, is it has pushed this particular issue to the forefront and given voice also to the diaspora communities, who are the biggest target of foreign interference. If you're a Chinese Canadian in this country, you probably have felt on some level a degree of meddling in, your life or your political views, or a pressure to do something or not do something, right? And I think that these are really important issues, and we've given, I think, a huge stage for the whole country to recognize that. And I think any government coming forward will be in a position where they can't ignore it. Again.
And picking up on your point, Chinese Canadians, because as we heard throughout the Commission's work, the People's Republic of China being the largest perpetrator, biggest player in foreign interference, yes. But not to forget India, Pakistan, Iran, and Russia getting involved in this.
For sure.
Bob, do you see this as a change in the culture as to how we deal with security and foreign interference in this country?
Well, first of all, I think the failure of the Commission's report has been an inability to make a lot of recommendations to deal with transnational repression. And she said part of the reason is that she didn't have a mandate to do so. It'd be nice if we could go back and try to figure out good ways from the government to go back to the diaspora communities to get their recommendations and try to implement them. But the biggest problem with this whole issue, and has been this for a very long time, is in this country is excessive secrecy. It's not just about national security issues like foreign interference, but we have too much secrecy in this country. And if there's anything that's come out of this inquiry, it's the Justice Hogg saying, stop it. Stop the excessive secrecy, open the doors, let people know what's going on. You, as security agencies, have to stop trying to keep everything to yourself. The only way you're going to deal with foreign interference and meddling in Canadian democracy is to let sunshine shine in.
JD?
Well, as you know, we talked about the fact that there's an election, federal election, maybe this spring, and so it's going to be the very first test after this report is published. And I'm raising a question to all of us. What will be the government's reaction to somebody who's actually close to Donald Trump, the owner of X, Elon Musk, who is actually using his platform to endorse and even disseminate disinformation? So that's going to be a big test. Will we take the big social media as X, TikTok, those platforms to the task and tell them to stop spreading disinformation? This is going to be the test soon enough.
Yeah, soon enough, as we also heard from NDP MP Charlie Angus this week. But listen, that is the time we have today. Thank you very much for adding your insight into this final report. Bob Fife of the Globe and Mail, Joe-Denis Bellevance of La Presse, and here in studio, Tana McCharles of the Toronto Star. And I'm Michael Serapio. Thank you for joining us here on CPAC. We will be back a little later this afternoon as we watch